It was just another Saturday afternoon at Riverside Mall, the kind of day where nothing special ever happens. Families walked around with shopping bags, kids begged their parents for ice cream, and teenagers sat on benches staring at their phones. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, mixing with the sound of distant conversations and the occasional announcement about store sales. In the middle of the main atrium, right between the Gap and the Starbucks, there sat a beautiful grand piano. Black and shiny, it looked almost out of place among the plastic plants and tile floors. The mall had put it there 6 months ago as part of some community initiative. A small sign next to it read "Play Me" in friendly letters. Most people walked right past it without a second glance. The piano wasn't silent, though. Throughout the day, brave souls would sit down and peck out a few notes. Sometimes it was a child banging randomly on the keys while their parent watched nervously. Other times it was someone who had taken lessons years ago, carefully playing chopsticks or "Happy Birthday" with rusty fingers. The mall didn't mind. It added a bit of life to the place. On this particular afternoon, a group of 4 teenagers had claimed the piano as their hangout spot. They weren't serious musicians by any stretch. One of them would sit down, play a few bars of whatever pop song was trending on TikTok, mess up, and then his friends would laugh and someone else would take a turn. They were having fun, and that's all that mattered. A few shoppers had stopped to watch, smiling at the kids' enthusiasm, even if the music itself was pretty rough around the edges. Among the steady stream of weekend shoppers, a woman made her way through the mall. She looked completely ordinary, mid-30s maybe, or early 40s. It was hard to tell. She wore faded jeans with a small tear at the knee. Not the fashionable kind you buy that way, but the real kind that comes from actually wearing clothes until they give out. Her hoodie was gray and oversized, the kind you throw on when you're running errands and don't want to think about what to wear. A baseball cap sat low on her head, casting a shadow over most of her face. She carried a canvas tote bag over one shoulder and seemed to be in no particular hurry. Just another person killing time at the mall on a weekend, maybe waiting for a friend, maybe avoiding going home to an empty apartment, maybe just enjoying the air conditioning on a warm day. Whatever her reason for being there, she didn't stand out in any way. She was perfectly, completely forgettable. The woman wandered past the usual stores, glancing in windows without much interest. She stopped at the bookstore for a few minutes, picked up a novel, read the back cover, then put it down again. She got in line at the coffee shop, but then seemed to change her mind and stepped out of line. She appeared restless, like she was looking for something but didn't quite know what. Then she heard it. The sound of the piano. It wasn't beautiful music by any means. One of the teenagers was attempting something that might have been a Bruno Mars song, but the notes came out choppy and uneven. Still, something about the sound made the woman stop walking. She stood there in the middle of the walkway, causing a man with shopping bags to swerve around her with an annoyed huff. She turned toward the sound and started walking slowly in that direction. As she got closer, she could see the group of kids gathered around the piano, laughing and encouraging each other. There was something sweet about it. Something pure. They weren't worried about being perfect. They were just enjoying themselves, making music in whatever way they could. The woman found herself standing at the edge of the small crowd that had formed. She wasn't watching the teenagers exactly. She was watching the piano itself. Her eyes traced the curves of the instrument, the way the light reflected off its polished surface, the precise spacing of the black and white keys. Her right hand, hanging at her side, began to move slightly. Her fingers pressed down on invisible keys, following along with the melody the kid was attempting to play. She didn't even realize she was doing it. It was automatic, like breathing. Her thumb, her index finger, her middle finger, all moving in sequence in the exact positions they would need to be in to produce those notes. Her hand even lifted slightly at the wrist when the melody jumped up an octave. Someone who knew what to look for would have recognized the gesture immediately. This woman knew pianos. She knew them well. One of the teenagers, a kid with curly hair and braces, finished his attempt at playing and stood up from the bench. His friends clapped and laughed. As he turned around, he noticed the woman standing there watching. At first, he looked a bit self-conscious, worried maybe that she was judging their terrible playing. But then he saw the slight smile on her face. It was a kind smile. Understanding. "Hey," he called out to her, his voice cracking slightly. "You want to try?" The woman's eyes widened a bit. She shook her head quickly, taking half a step back. "Oh no, I couldn't. Come on. Another one of the kids chimed in, a girl with bright purple streaks in her hair. It's fun. Nobody here cares if you mess up. We're all terrible anyway. The small crowd around the piano seemed to pick up on what was happening. A few people started encouraging her too. Go ahead, said an older gentleman with kind eyes. Give it a shot. The woman looked around at all the faces. There was something in the air, a sort of collective hope that she would say yes. These were regular people. People with jobs they probably didn't love, bills they worried about, relationships that weren't perfect. But in this moment, they were all connected by this simple thing. This invitation to make a little music together. I don't know, the woman said softly, but even as she said it, her feet were moving forward. Inch by inch, she was getting closer to the piano. Her fingers flexed again at her sides, more noticeably this time. A mother standing nearby noticed it and smiled knowingly. Please, said a little girl, no more than 6 years old, tugging on the woman's sleeve. Play something pretty. The woman looked down at the child's hopeful face and felt something crack open inside her chest. How could she say no to that? How could she say no to this moment? To these people, to the piano that seemed to be calling to her across the space? She took a deep breath, the kind you take before jumping into cold water. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, I'll play something. The small crowd made space for her as she approached the bench. The teenager stepped aside, suddenly respectful, sensing somehow that something different was about to happen. The woman set her tote bag down on the floor next to the piano. She sat down on the bench and immediately adjusted its height with the lever underneath, moving it down 2 notches with practiced ease. She reached up and removed her baseball cap, setting it carefully on top of the piano. As she did, a few strands of dark hair fell forward across her face. She tucked them behind her ear with fingers that were long and elegant. Her posture began to change. Her back straightened. Her shoulders settled into position. Her hands moved forward toward the keys and hovered there, trembling slightly. The crowd had gone quiet now. Even the teenagers had stopped talking. Everyone was watching, waiting. The woman's hands hung suspended over the keyboard for what felt like forever but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. Her eyes closed. She took one more breath, and then her fingers touched the keys. The first notes that came from the piano were soft, gentle, almost hesitant. The woman's fingers pressed down on the keys with a lightness that seemed to make the instrument whisper rather than sing. It was a simple melody, nothing fancy. The kind of thing you might hear in an elevator or a waiting room, safe, forgettable. The crowd relaxed a little. A few people nodded politely. It was nice enough, they thought. Better than what the teenagers had been playing, certainly, but nothing to write home about. One man checked his watch, ready to move on with his shopping. A woman adjusted her purse strap, preparing to leave, but then something changed. The woman's right hand began to move faster. The simple melody started to branch out, growing more complex. Her left hand joined in, adding depth and harmony that hadn't been there before. The notes began to dance across the keys, chasing each other, building on top of one another. What had started as a trickle was becoming a stream. The man who had checked his watch stopped moving. The woman with the purse lowered her hand back to her side. The teenagers who had been whispering to each other fell silent. Even the little girl who had asked the woman to play stood perfectly still, her eyes wide. The music was changing everything. It filled the space around the piano first, then spread outward like ripples on water. Shoppers passing by 20 feet away slowed their steps. Conversations at nearby tables died mid-sentence. A barista making coffee at the Starbucks turned down the milk steamer so she could hear better. The usual background noise of the mall seemed to fade away, replaced by something none of them had expected to find there. The woman's entire body had transformed. She wasn't the same person who had shuffled through the mall in her worn-out hoodie just minutes ago. Her back was straight but not stiff. Her shoulders moved with the music, swaying slightly. Her head tilted toward the keys as if she were listening to them speak to her, and her hands, those ordinary-looking hands that had been hidden in her pockets, were flying across the keyboard with impossible grace. She wasn't just playing the piano. She was having a conversation with it. Her fingers knew exactly where to go, exactly how hard to press, exactly when to pull back and let a note breathe. There was no hesitation anymore, no uncertainty. Every movement was precise and intentional, yet somehow it all looked effortless. Natural, like watching a bird fly or a river flow. The melody shifted again, this time taking on a more melancholic tone. Minor chords crept in, bringing with them a sense of longing, of something lost. The woman's face reflected the change. Her eyes, which had been closed, opened slightly, staring at something no one else could see. A memory, maybe, or a feeling she'd been carrying around for too long. More people were gathering now. They came from all directions, drawn by the sound. A security guard who had been making his rounds stopped at the edge of the crowd, his hand frozen on his radio. He'd been about to call in something about the gathering, but the music stopped him. He just stood there listening, his usual stern expression softening. An elderly couple who had been sitting on a bench 50 feet away got up and walked over, holding hands. They stood at the back of the crowd, and the old man put his arm around his wife's shoulders. She leaned into him, her eyes glistening. The music was stirring up memories for them, too. Their wedding, maybe, or their first dance, or just all the years they'd spent together, the good ones and the hard ones. The woman at the piano moved into a new section of the piece. Her hands spread wider across the keys, reaching for notes at opposite ends of the keyboard. The music swelled, growing bigger and bolder. It filled not just the atrium now, but seemed to seep into every corner of the mall. People in distant stores stopped what they were doing, wondering where that beautiful sound was coming from. A mother holding a baby felt the infant stop fussing in her arms. The baby's eyes went wide, focusing on the direction of the music with the kind of attention babies rarely give to anything. The mother looked down at her child in surprise, then back at the piano, understanding somehow that her baby was experiencing something special. The teenagers who had invited the woman to play stood closest to the piano. They watched her hands with expressions that were part amazement, part envy, part inspiration. The boy with the curly hair and braces had his mouth hanging open. The girl with purple streaks in her hair had pulled out her phone and was recording, but even she seemed to have forgotten about the screen in her hand. She was just watching, mesmerized. The music kept building. It was clear now that this wasn't some casual performance. This was something else entirely. The woman wasn't showing off or trying to impress anyone. She was pouring herself into the music, using it to say things that words could never capture. Joy and pain, hope and grief, love and loss. It was all there, woven into every note. Sweat had started to form on her forehead. Her breathing had become deeper, more visible. Playing like this took physical effort, not just skill. Her fingers moved so fast they were almost blurring. Yet somehow each individual note rang out clear and distinct. It was like watching a professional athlete at the peak of their performance, or an artist completing a masterpiece. You couldn't look away even if you wanted to. The crowd had grown to more than 50 people now, packed in a semicircle around the piano. They stood shoulder to shoulder, strangers united by the music washing over them. Some had tears running down their cheeks without even realizing it. Others wore slight smiles, lost in whatever feelings the music was bringing up. A few just looked stunned, like they couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. In the back of the crowd, a woman in a business suit had frozen in place. Her face had gone pale. She squinted at the pianist, then pulled out her phone and started scrolling frantically through something. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, searching. Her eyes kept darting between the phone and the woman at the piano, back and forth, like she was trying to confirm something impossible. The music reached a crescendo, a moment of pure intensity that made everyone's breath catch. The woman's hands came down on the keys with force, drawing out notes that seemed to shake the very air around them. Then, just as quickly, she pulled back. The volume dropped. The tempo slowed. She was bringing the piece to a close, guiding it gently back down from the heights it had reached. Her fingers moved through the final phrases with tender care. The melody returned to something close to where it had started, but different now. Changed. The way a person is changed after a long journey, even when they come back to the same place. The last few notes fell like tears, soft and inevitable. Then she played the final chord. It hung in the air for a long moment, sustained by the pedal beneath her foot, before gradually fading into silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody made a sound. The woman's hand stayed on the keys, trembling slightly. Her eyes were closed again. Her chest rose and fell with deep breaths. She looked exhausted, relieved, vulnerable. Then someone started clapping. It was the old man, the one who had walked over holding his wife's hand. His applause started alone, but within half a heartbeat everyone joined in. The sound of clapping filled the mall like thunder. People weren't just clapping politely the way you do when something is nice. They were clapping hard, enthusiastically, with real feeling behind it. Some were cheering, some were whistling. The woman at the piano looked up, startled, as if she'd forgotten there were people watching. Her face flushed red. She wasn't used to this anymore. You could see it in her eyes. This kind of attention made her uncomfortable now. She started to stand up, ready to grab her bag and disappear back into the anonymity of the crowd. But that's when the woman in the business suit pushed her way forward, her phone still in her hand. Her voice cut through the applause. "Wait, I know who you are." The woman at the piano froze. Her hand, which had been reaching for her tote bag, stopped midair. The color drained from her face. For a moment she looked like she might run, just grab her things and push through the crowd and disappear before anyone could stop her. The woman in the business suit held up her phone, showing the screen to the people around her. On it was a photo, and even from a distance you could see it matched the woman at the piano. Same face, same features, but in the photo she looked different, polished, confident. Her hair was styled perfectly and she wore an elegant black dress. She stood on a stage in front of a massive concert hall, a grand piano behind her, holding a bouquet of roses. "You're her," the businesswoman said, her voice shaking with excitement. "You're the pianist, the one who played at Carnegie Hall and the Royal Albert Hall in London. I saw you perform in Chicago 3 years ago. It was incredible. I've never forgotten it." A murmur ran through the crowd. People pulled out their own phones, searching. The name being whispered was one that some recognized immediately. Others had to look it up, but when they did, their eyes went wide. This wasn't just some talented person who could play piano. This was someone famous, someone who had performed for presidents and royalty, someone whose recordings had millions of streams, someone who had been called a once-in-a-generation talent by critics around the world. The teenager with purple streaks in her hair gasped as she looked at her phone screen. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You disappeared. Everyone's been wondering where you went. There are articles about it, theories." The woman at the piano looked down at her hands, still resting on the keys. She seemed smaller now, like she was trying to fold into herself. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible over the excited chatter of the crowd. "I needed to step away," she said simply. The businesswoman took a step closer, her expression softening from excitement to something more like concern. "I read about what happened. About your daughter. I'm so sorry." A heavy silence fell over the crowd. The people who had been scrambling to look her up on their phones stopped. Those who didn't know the full story could feel the weight of those words anyway. "Your daughter." The two words explained everything and nothing all at once. The pianist's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly. She stood up from the bench, her movement stiff and awkward now. Nothing like the fluid grace she'd shown while playing. She picked up her baseball cap from the top of the piano and clutched it in her hands like a shield. "I'm sorry," she said to no one in particular. "I didn't mean to cause a scene. I should go." But the old man who had started the applause stepped forward. His weathered face was kind, full of understanding that only comes from living a long life with its share of heartbreak. "Don't apologize," he said gently. "What you just gave us, that was a gift." "A real gift?" His wife nodded, wiping her own eyes. "We lost our son 5 years ago," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And what you played just now, it felt like he was here with us again. Just for a moment. Thank you for that." The pianist looked at the elderly couple and something in her expression cracked. A tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She just stood there holding her cap, looking at these strangers who suddenly didn't feel like strangers anymore. More people began to speak up. A young man in a delivery uniform said he'd been having the worst day of his life until he heard her play. A woman with a baby said she'd felt nothing but exhaustion for months, but the music had reminded her why she kept going. The mother of the little girl who had tugged on the pianist's sleeve said her daughter had been asking to take piano lessons for a year, and now she was definitely going to say yes. The security guard who had been standing at the edge of the crowd cleared his throat. Everyone looked at him, worried he might be about to break up the gathering or ask the pianist to leave. But instead he just said, "My wife used to play piano. She passed last year, cancer. I haven't been able to listen to piano music since. It hurt too much. But this, what you did, it didn't hurt, it helped. So thank you." The pianist's shoulders began to shake. She was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it anymore. But these weren't just tears of sadness. They were mixed with something else. Relief, maybe. Or release. Like pressure that had been building for years was finally finding a way out. The teenager with the curly hair and braces, the one who had first invited her to play, spoke up. His voice cracked with emotion. "I thought I was pretty good at piano," he said with a self-deprecating laugh. "But watching you, I realized I don't know anything. And that's actually really cool, because it means there's so much more to learn, so much more to experience. You made me want to practice, like really practice, not just mess around." His friends nodded in agreement. The girl with purple streaks held up her phone, showing the video she'd recorded. "I got most of it. Is it okay if I post this? People should see this." The pianist hesitated. For 2 years, she'd avoided cameras, avoided attention, avoided anything that reminded her of the life she'd left behind. She'd been running from who she used to be, trying to figure out who she was now. The thought of that video going online, of being recognized everywhere she went, of losing this quiet anonymity she'd worked so hard to maintain, it terrified her. But then she looked around at the faces in the crowd, really looked at them. She saw the way the music had touched them, changed them, even if just for a few minutes. She saw the teenager's newfound determination, the elderly couple holding each other close, the security guard with tears in his eyes, the mother smiling at her daughter. All these people, carrying their own pain and struggles and hopes, connected by what she'd created. This was why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. Not for the fame or the sold-out concert halls or the reviews in fancy magazines. It was for this. For the connection. For the way music could reach into someone's chest and rearrange things, make them feel less alone, remind them that beauty still existed even in a world that could be so cruel. She took a deep breath and nodded at the teenager. "Yes, you can post it." The girl's face lit up. "Really?" "Really. But maybe add something in the caption," the pianist said, her voice growing steadier. "Tell people that music doesn't just belong on big stages. It belongs everywhere. In malls and parks and living rooms. Anywhere someone needs to hear it." The crowd erupted in applause again, even louder than before. But this time the pianist didn't look scared or uncomfortable. She smiled. A real genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was the first time she'd smiled like that in longer than she could remember. The mall manager, who had been watching from a distance, approached with a radio in her hand and a stunned expression on her face. "Miss," she said, still trying to process what had just happened in her mall on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. "That was extraordinary. If you're ever interested, would you consider playing here again? Maybe we could arrange something official?" The pianist thought about it for a moment. A few months ago, even a few minutes ago, she would have said no without hesitation. But standing here, surrounded by these people whose lives she'd touched, she felt something stirring inside her, something she thought had died along with her daughter. Hope, purpose, the desire to create again. "Maybe," she said softly. "Let me think about it." As the crowd began to slowly disperse, people kept approaching her, thanking her, sharing their stories, asking questions. She answered what she could, accepted their gratitude with grace, and listened to their words with genuine attention. Each person who spoke to her was healing something inside her, piece by piece. The teenager with the purple streaks was already typing furiously on her phone, uploading the video with the caption the pianist had suggested. Within minutes, it had dozens of views, then hundreds, then thousands. The numbers kept climbing, faster and faster, as people shared it with friends and family, as it spread across social media platforms like wildfire. But the pianist didn't know that yet. She was too busy talking to the old man about his son, listening to the security guard's memories of his wife, encouraging the young teenager to never give up on his practice. She was present, connected, alive in a way she hadn't been in 2 years. The disguise hadn't worked. Her secret was out. But maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. By the time the pianist finally left the mall 2 hours later, her feet hurt and her voice was hoarse from talking. She'd given out more of herself in that one afternoon than she had in the past 2 years combined. Her tote bag felt heavier on her shoulder, but her chest felt lighter. It was a strange trade-off, one she wasn't quite sure how to process yet. She walked to her car in the parking garage, still wearing her baseball cap pulled low, though she knew now that the disguise didn't matter anymore. As she clicked the unlock button on her key fob, her old sedan beeped twice. The sound echoed in the concrete structure. She slid into the driver's seat and just sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. What had she just done? Her phone, which she'd silenced hours ago, buzzed in her pocket, then buzzed again, and again, and again. She pulled it out hesitantly and saw the screen flooded with notifications, text messages from numbers she didn't recognize, emails pouring into her inbox, social media notifications by the hundreds. Her agent, who she hadn't spoken to in 18 months, had called 7 times. With trembling fingers, she opened one of the social media apps. The video was everywhere. The teenager had posted it, yes, but now thousands of other people had shared it. Millions of views already, and the number kept climbing as she watched. The comment section was endless. "I'm literally crying at my desk right now. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I didn't know music could make me feel like this. Who is she? I need to know everything about her. She disappeared after her daughter died. This is her first public performance in 2 years. The way she plays, you can hear her pain and her healing all at once." She scrolled through hundreds of comments, each one a small window into a stranger's life. People were sharing how the music had affected them, what they were going through, why those few minutes of piano playing in a mall had meant something to them. A woman dealing with divorce, a man who'd just lost his job, a college student struggling with anxiety, a father sitting in a hospital waiting room. All of them connected by what she'd created. Her phone rang, making her jump. It was her agent. She stared at the screen for a long moment before finally answering. "Do you have any idea what's happening right now?" Her agent's voice was breathless with excitement. "You're trending worldwide. Every major music publication is calling me. They want interviews. They want to know if you're coming back. There's already talk of a comeback tour. I've got venues reaching out, record labels, streaming platforms, everyone." The pianist closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the seat. "I just played piano in a mall. You just reminded the entire world why they fell in love with you in the first place," her agent corrected. "And more importantly, you reminded yourself. I can hear it in your voice. You sound different, more like the person I used to know. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this. Then don't be ready. Just be open to the possibility." Her agent's voice softened. "I'm not going to push you. I learned my lesson about that. But I want you to know that if you decide you want to play again, really play again, the world is ready to listen. They've been waiting for you." After they hung up, the pianist sat in her car for another 20 minutes, watching the view count on the video climb higher and higher. She read more comments, watched as news articles began to pop up about her surprise performance, saw her name trending on multiple platforms. The life she'd walked away from was suddenly rushing back toward her like a wave, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to swim toward it or run in the opposite direction. She drove home to her small apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was nothing like the spacious house she used to own, the one with the music room and the grand piano by the window. She'd sold that house 6 months after her daughter died. Too many memories in every corner, too many ghosts. This apartment was simple, sparse, almost anonymous. Exactly what she'd needed at the time. But as she unlocked the door and stepped inside, she saw it differently. The blank walls weren't peaceful anymore. They were empty. The silence wasn't comforting. It was lonely. The small digital keyboard she'd bought at a pawn shop sat in the corner, covered with a thin layer of dust. She'd barely touched it in months. It had felt like a betrayal to play, like she didn't deserve joy when her daughter would never experience it again. She walked over to the keyboard and wiped the dust off with her sleeve. She plugged it in and sat down on the folding chair in front of it. The keys felt cheap under her fingers compared to the beautiful grand piano at the mall, but they would do. She pressed down on middle C and let the single note ring out in her quiet apartment. Then she began to play. This time she played something different, not the classical pieces she was famous for, not the technically perfect performances that critics raved about. She played what she felt. A melody came out of her fingers that she didn't recognize, something new, something that had been growing inside her without her realizing it. It was sad in places, hopeful in others. It stumbled and found its way again. It was imperfect and real and honest. She played until her fingers ached. She played until the sun set outside her window, and the apartment grew dark around her. She played until tears ran down her face and her throat was tight with emotion, and when she finally stopped, she realized something that made her laugh out loud through her tears. She'd been so afraid that playing again would hurt too much, that it would remind her of everything she'd lost. And it did remind her, but it also reminded her of everything she still had. The ability to create, the power to connect with others, the gift that her daughter had loved watching her share with the world. Her little girl used to sit in the front row at concerts, her eyes wide with wonder, telling anyone who would listen that, "My mama makes magic with pianos." Her daughter wouldn't want this music to die with her. She'd want it to keep going, to keep touching people, to keep making magic. The pianist picked up her phone again and scrolled through her contacts until she found her agent's number. Before she could second-guess herself, she typed out a message. "Let's talk about what comes next. But I want to do it differently this time. Smaller venues. Places where I can see people's faces. Where it feels like the mall today. Real. Connected. Can we do that?" The response came back almost immediately. "Absolutely. We'll figure it out together. I'm so glad you're back." But the pianist wasn't quite done yet. She opened her social media app and for the first time in 2 years, she posted something. It wasn't a professional photo or a polished announcement. It was just words typed quickly before she could change her mind. "Today I played piano in public for the first time since I lost my daughter. I was scared. I almost didn't do it. But a group of teenagers and a little girl convinced me to sit down at that bench, and it reminded me why I fell in love with music." It's not about perfection or fame or sold-out concert halls. It's about connection. It's about reminding each other that we're not alone in this world. Thank you to everyone at Riverside Mall today. You gave me back something I thought was gone forever. You gave me back myself. She hit post before she could overthink it, then set her phone face down on the table. Within seconds, it started buzzing with responses, but she didn't look. Not yet. Instead, she stood up and walked to the small closet in her bedroom. On the top shelf, pushed to the very back, was a box she hadn't opened in 2 years. Inside was a framed photo of her daughter at her 5th birthday party, chocolate cake smeared across her smiling face. There were programs from concerts her daughter had attended, drawings her daughter had made of Mama playing music, and at the very bottom, a letter her daughter had dictated to her father to write down when she was 6, a few months before she got sick. "Dear Mama, I love when you play piano. It makes me feel happy inside. Promise you'll always play even when I'm grown up and gone away. Love, your biggest fan." The pianist held the letter in her shaking hands and read it 3 times. Her daughter had been 6. She couldn't have known what those words would mean. But somehow they were exactly what the pianist needed to hear right now. "I promise," she whispered to the photo, to the memory, to the love that would never fade. "I promise I'll keep playing." She carefully placed everything back in the box except for the photo, which she carried back to the living room and set on the small table next to her keyboard. Her daughter's smile would watch over her while she played from now on, not as a source of pain, but as a reminder of why the music mattered. The pianist sat back down at the keyboard and began to play again, and this time she was smiling too. 3 months later, the pianist stood backstage at a small theater across town. Her hands were sweating. Her heart was racing. She'd performed in front of thousands of people before, in some of the most prestigious venues in the world, but somehow this felt bigger, more important, more real. The theater only held about 300 people and every seat was full. But these weren't the usual concert goers in expensive suits and designer dresses. These were regular people. The elderly couple from the mall had tickets in the 3rd row. The security guard and his teenage daughter were there. The teenagers who'd been playing at the piano that day had a whole section reserved for them and their families. The mother with the little girl who'd tugged on her sleeve sat near the front, her daughter wearing a fancy dress for the special occasion. The mall manager was there too, along with dozens of mall employees who'd heard about what happened that Saturday afternoon. There were nurses still in their scrubs who'd rushed over after their shifts. Teachers who'd used the viral video in their classes to talk about the power of art. Office workers who'd watched the video on their lunch breaks and cried at their desks. Construction workers, bus drivers, students, baristas. All of them united by that one moment of unexpected beauty in an ordinary place. Her agent peeked through the curtain and turned back to her with a grin. "They're ready for you. Are you ready for them?" The pianist took a deep breath. She was wearing a simple black dress, nothing fancy. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. She looked more like herself now than she had in years. Not the polished, untouchable performer she'd been before. Not the broken, hiding woman she'd become after. Something in between. Something new. "I'm ready," she said, and she meant it. The lights in the theater dimmed. The crowd went quiet. She walked out onto the stage, and the applause that greeted her was warm and genuine. Not the polite clapping of a formal concert, but the enthusiastic welcome of people who felt like they knew her. People who'd been on a journey with her, even if they'd only just met that day at the mall. She sat down at the grand piano in the center of the stage. The spotlight was bright but not uncomfortable. She adjusted the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and looked out at the audience. She could see their faces, their eyes, their anticipation. "Thank you for being here," she said into the microphone that had been set up beside the piano. Her voice shook slightly, but that was okay. 3 months ago, I hadn't played for an audience in 2 years. I was convinced that part of my life was over, that I'd never be able to create music again without it destroying me. The theater was silent except for her voice. Then some teenagers at a mall invited me to play, and a little girl asked me to play something pretty, and I couldn't say no. And what happened next changed everything. Not because the video went viral, though that was surreal, but because I remembered something I'd forgotten. Music isn't mine to keep. It's meant to be shared. It's meant to connect us, to remind us that we're all human, all struggling, all hoping for something better. She paused, looking down at the keys, gathering her thoughts. I lost my daughter 2 years ago. She was 7 years old, and she was my biggest fan. She used to tell people I made magic with pianos. The pianist's voice cracked, but she pushed through. For a long time, I thought the magic died with her. But you all taught me something. The magic isn't gone. It's just different now. It carries her with it. Every note I play is a way of keeping her alive, of honoring the joy she found in music. There wasn't a dry eye in the theater. The little girl in the fancy dress was holding her mother's hand tightly. The elderly woman was leaning against her husband's shoulder. The security guard had his arm around his daughter. "So tonight, I'm not performing for you. I'm playing with you." This is for everyone who's lost something. Everyone who's trying to find their way back. Everyone who needs a reminder that beautiful things can still happen, even in the middle of ordinary life. She turned to the piano and began to play. The first piece was the same one she'd played at the mall, the one that had started everything. But it sounded different now, more confident, more purposeful. She'd played it hundreds of times since that day, practicing in her apartment, rediscovering the joy of simply playing for the sake of playing. Each note came from a deeper place now, a place of acceptance rather than just pain. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. But she didn't stop. She moved into another piece, then another. She played classical compositions that showcased her technical skill. She played modern pieces that made people tap their feet. She even played a song that her daughter had loved, a simple children's melody that she transformed into something profound and moving. Between pieces, she talked to the audience. She told stories. She laughed. She cried. She invited the teenagers from the mall to come up and play a duet with her, which they did with shaking hands and huge smiles. She asked the little girl in the fancy dress what she wanted to hear, and when the girl shyly requested "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," the pianist played it with the same intensity and beauty she'd give to any masterpiece. 2 hours passed like minutes. When she finally played her last piece, a composition she'd written herself in the weeks after the mall performance, the audience rose to their feet. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. People were cheering, crying, applauding until their hands hurt. But the most important moment came after the concert, when people lined up to talk to her. Not to get autographs or selfies, though some asked for those too. They came to share their stories, to tell her what the music meant to them, to thank her for being brave enough to sit down at that mall piano. The security guard told her he'd started listening to piano music again, and it helped him feel close to his late wife. The elderly couple said they'd been having a hard year, but the concert reminded them of all the beauty they still had together. The teenagers said they'd been practicing every day, inspired by what she'd shown them was possible. And the little girl, the one who'd asked her to play something pretty that day at the mall, handed her a drawing. It was a picture of a woman at a piano with musical notes floating up into the sky, where a small angel was catching them. At the bottom, in wobbly handwriting, it said, Thank you for the magic. The pianist knelt down to the little girl's level, holding the drawing carefully. Can I keep this? She asked. The girl nodded enthusiastically. My mama says you're a hero. Are you? The pianist thought about it for a moment, then smiled. No, sweetheart. You're the hero. You and everyone else who asked me to play that day, you saved me. As the crowd finally dispersed and the theater emptied out, the pianist sat alone on the stage for a few minutes. The piano sat silent beside her, patient and waiting. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. The devastating loss, the long silence, the accidental performance, the viral video, the decision to try again, and now this, a new beginning built on honesty and connection rather than perfection and prestige. Her phone buzzed with a message from her agent. The video from tonight is already getting millions of views. Venues around the country are calling. Are you ready to take this further? She smiled and typed back. Yes, but only places where I can see people's faces. Only places that feel like home. Because that's what she'd learned that day at the mall, surrounded by strangers who'd become friends. Music wasn't about the biggest stages or the most prestigious awards. It was about the moments when a sound could reach across the space between two people and say, I see you. I understand. You're not alone. The pianist stood up, gathered her things, and took one last look at the empty theater. Tomorrow she'd start planning the next concert. She'd return to the mall to play for free once a month, keeping her connection to where it all began. She'd work with her agent to book tours in small theaters and community centers and anywhere else that people gathered. But tonight, she was going home to her apartment, to the keyboard in her living room, to the photo of her daughter watching over it all, and she was going to play just for herself, just for the joy of it, just because the music was still there inside her, waiting to come out. The disguise she'd worn that day at the mall was gone forever. She couldn't hide anymore, and she didn't want to. Because she'd finally understood what her daughter had known all along. The real magic wasn't in playing perfectly. It was in playing bravely, in showing up, in sharing yourself with the world even when it scared you, especially when it scared you. And as she walked out of the theater into the cool night air, she felt her daughter's presence beside her, proud and loving and eternal. The music would go on. And so would she.